This, at least at the beginning, might be a little more technical, or it might sound more like coming from a teacher rather than a preacher, and not quite as simple as Pat can make it just plain and easy for the children to understand. So bear with me, all right? I've said several times that a class that I teach for Grand Canyon University is on ethics and ethical issues in ethics and ethical issues in healthcare. And the first week of the class, the students are introduced to the idea that there is a sense that everyone is spiritual, that spirituality is intrinsic to the human person, that it's not something outside or even something that we choose, but rather spirituality is who we are, what we're about. This is in contrast to even talking about religion. Spirituality is not what we choose, like religion, but who we are. Religion is indeed something that we choose to follow, to participate in, to be a part of. For some of them, this is a new idea, spirituality being intrinsic, but also being different from religion, because we often do imagine that religion is the same as spirituality, or that spirituality is the same as religion. But if we know through the Pew Research that right now in the United States, 30% of Americans have disconnected from organized religion. So does that mean that they're no longer spiritual? No, I think probably Alexis in talking to younger people and young adults and that, people will say, well, I don't go to church anymore, but I'm still spiritual, right? You hear this all the time. So it gives evidence or credence to the idea that there is a difference between spirituality and religion. I'm getting there. I'm working towards my point, okay? So hang with me, all right? Everybody, all of you on Zoom, don't go off for coffee, but stick with me, all right, on Zoom. I say all of this because there's a sense, at least for those of us in the United States anyway, that when we were founded as a country, there was a negative view of religion. And it was negative because if you grew up in 16th and 17th century England in particular, it was expected that you were to be a member of the official, quote, state church. And so many of our founders who were enlightened in the period of enlightenment, right? When science and religion didn't talk to one another very much, that the period of enlightenment says, you know, that we don't really need religion per se to move us into an awareness of the divine presence around us. And it's always interesting. I love it when conservative Christians want to make the United States a Christian country because the founding fathers were good Christians. They were deists. And deist means that they believed in some divine being out there, but that's about as far as they would go. In fact, if you know anything about Thomas Jefferson was one, and you can see this in the Library of Congress. He went through the New Testament, cutting out, literally cutting out all the miracles of Jesus in the Gospels, because he was convinced that if you couldn't prove it by science, that it didn't exist. And so there are great holes in his New Testament. That's a really good Christian, isn't it? Sounds to me like, right? No, obviously not. That he had a great belief in the commonness of, the commonality of the human community, right? He did have that. That's why you read great phrases like, how does it go? I forgot, see the brain. That we believe in the equality of, quote, man. Of course, that did mean in 17th century America only men. Women were not considered much of anything.
Only white men. Only white men.
Oh, white property men had value, so that African Americans and Native Americans and everybody else didn't have any value whatsoever. Anyway, you see how great a Christian idea that is. But they had this enlightened idea of the unity of the human community, that we were all equal, and that somehow God had something to do with that. But what happened is that because of that negative view of religion, that even though the Constitution does not reject religion, it just says the state can create a religion, meaning that there isn't a state religion like there was in England, or like there was really in most of Europe, Western Europe at that time, that there can't be a state religion, that there is freedom to be religious in the country, but there can't be a state religion. And so my opinion, now this is just my opinion is that through all of the struggles, because growing up Catholic, there were many stories told in my circle, especially as people from Italy and Eastern Europe started coming in as immigrants who were Catholic, that there was a great rise of anti-Catholicism in the country, such that Catholics couldn't build their churches. They had to disguise them as ordinary buildings in the neighborhoods. And so you could walk right by a Catholic church and never know that it was a church. The Protestants, on the other hand, could build great white steepled churches, right? Most Protestant churches, if you go to New England, and that have these great churches with white steeples, telling everybody of their existence. But in the meantime, what began to happen is that the practice of spirituality and religion becomes something very private. That displaying one's religious beliefs or one's spirituality out in public was just something not only frowned upon, but often criticized. How dare you? Have you ever noticed? You know instantly who's Catholic, old traditional Catholic, because when they sit down at a restaurant to eat dinner, they make the sign of the cross, and you know, oh boy, there's a Catholic. Mark them over there. Or Jews who wear yarmulkes around, or anything like that. So that in the United States, at least, that the practice of religion becomes something very private and very personal, that we don't even bring it up in conversation, in a public conversation. Because after all, you might be talking to a Catholic and you're not supposed to talk to them. Oh, you might be talking to a Protestant. You're really not, because you never know, associating with them or mixing with them in public might mean you lose your faith or you stop going to the church that you were baptized in. Well, surprise, surprise, none of that private thing ever stopped any of that from happening, and it went on. I tell you all that because I remember, this is probably over 50 years ago now, I was working in the summer in a church in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And if you know anything about New Mexico or anything about the quote church in New Mexico, that of course the Spanish brought Catholicism. It's the old story of colonialism, cross and sword, that the Franciscan friars were planting the cross of Jesus Christ while the soldiers were, well, doing whatever they did to the Native Americans in the area, right? And so forth. But in New Mexico, there's still a very strong, in the smaller communities, still a very strong religious spirit and experience and practice. I remember this particular time towards the end, I believe it's in October. And there we were walking, this coming from the Midwest where we didn't let anybody know that we were religious, walking in procession through the streets of Santa Fe, from the cathedral down to this little chapel on the outskirts, singing Marian songs, and people were praying, and they carried the statue of Mary through. And I just thought, this is really bizarre. Here we are in the United States, not supposed to be very public about our religious affiliation, finding that we're walking through the streets of a city, praying and singing, and wow, that was just, if you've ever seen the story in Spain, particularly in Holy Weeks as it comes in, they have processions every day, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people in procession carrying statues. It's a very public display, even though right now, if you go to any church in Europe, probably there's not going to be very many people in those churches. So anyway, that's another part of the story. What I'm trying to suggest is that you see, when it comes to understanding who we are as spiritual beings, meaning that there's something about us outside of us where purpose and meaning is not just to be found inside, but purpose and meaning can be found outside in the universe and creation. We'll talk more about that next week. Out there in the world. But purpose and meaning is not something that I also make for myself. I have an argument with my students all the time. Can atheists be spiritual people? And most of them, because they're so steeped in conservative Christianity, absolutely not. Atheists can't be spiritual people. And I go, but if spirituality is intrinsic to everyone, then of course atheists can be spiritual people. It's just going to look different, right? Look different than Christianity or Islam or Buddhism or Judaism or any of the other organized religions. It's going to look different. So that purpose and meaning is not going to come from God or be motivated by God. Purpose and meaning is going to come from someplace else. I say again, all of that, because something in the scriptures today, I think, has to do with, do we keep this private to ourselves, or is there a public character to it? So notice in the argument here, and maybe that's a part of the challenge in helping to understand this text in Isaiah, that where the text falls in the book of the prophet Isaiah comes when people are, the world, again, the armies of Assyria are outside the walls of Jerusalem, and they are about ready to, that's going to be it. Everything is going to be over. All the glory of Solomon and David is come crashing down because they're going to be overrun and sent into exile. And so the people thought, here's a way that we can respond to this impending threat. We'll just go and put more incense on the incense burners so our prayers go up to God. We'll just go around the streets chanting and praying and praying. And you see, then God will take notice of us, and God will crash the armies of Assyria and Babylon, and we will be victorious. And so if we just do our rituals and our praying and our chanting to God and pouring more incense, that will help. And Isaiah goes, let's see. I don't think that's working too well. How's it work for you so far? And so Isaiah says, that's not maybe what the idea is. Have you fed the hungry today? Did you take care of those people out there on the street who don't have a decent house to live in? Have you done any of the things that the Torah asked you to do? Well, if you haven't done any of those things, then how do you expect that God is even going to pay much attention to you? Because God had first asked you to do these things. Did God ever say, chant and make your rituals and pour incense on the incense burners and stand around shouting hosannas? Did God ask you to do that? No. God has asked you to care for your brother and sister as your own family member. God has asked you not to practice violence and hate towards anyone. God has said when you harvest your crops, don't take it all the way to the edge of the property, but rather leave some for those who are hungry. God has said that if you've got 2 blankets, give one away. God has said all of these things that you, Israel, are not doing. So how can you expect that God is going to do anything for you if you are not also doing? And you see, all of that is what? A public display. Yeah. It's a public display. It's easy, right? To say, I should feed the hungry. I should clothe the naked. I should visit the sick. Notice I didn't say what I'm going to do about that. If it's all a great thought, that's wonderful that you think these wonderful things. But if you're not going to do it in public, if you're not really going to make a difference about it, then what's the point? What's the point of it? And notice in the text in Isaiah, and that's the link to the gospel, the text in Isaiah says, and it's not that we go around, with a big sign, hey, folks out there, I'm feeding the hungry today. Hey, folks out there, I'm doing works of justice. See how good I am? That's not what it says. Rather, it says, do it in such a way that, as the Isaiah text says, that it's actually bringing enlightenment, meaning more light to the world, more hope to the world, more peace to the world. You're doing it. Here's the catch. You're doing it not to get yourself anything. You're not accumulating. I always used to thought as a kid in the Catholic tradition that there was if you said these short little prayers, and this is one of them, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, pray for me. If you said that little prayer, that you got 450 days of indulgence. And this is what Martin Luther fought against, that the 450 days of indulgence meant that when you died, and maybe you didn't quite live such a holy life, that you would go to, quote, purgatory, that the 430 days from that one little short prayer gave you time off of purgatory. So you had 450 left days in purgatory. And I thought, oh boy, let me say as many of those prayers as I can, because I figured that around 40, I could take the rest of my life off and I didn't have to be good or holy or do anything, because I had accumulated in a savings account all of these days. And somebody when I was about 50 said, it doesn't work that way. And I said, what? It doesn't work that way? What are you thinking? You see, part of it is that what am I doing just in saying the prayer? I'm not really doing anything about the people in the world. I'm doing it for me. And that's a part of it. You see, perhaps, notice it, and this is the troubling thing, and we'll have to figure this out for those of us doing the book study, because Amy G. Levine has a lot to say, that it's easy to say, those dirty scribes and Pharisees. Well, that's not it. They're good people. They're doing what they're supposed to be doing. You just have to do more. You have to be doing more, but not doing it to make yourself bigger, greater, but doing it because you know that that's exactly what you're supposed to be doing. So again, think about it, even for the children, right? Think about the image of the light. What does the light do? The light doesn't just burn at the end of a candle, right? That if we were to turn all the lights out in here and have just the one candle, that the closer you are to the candle, right, the more light you see. The further away from the candle you are, the less light there is, right? The same in terms of what was the other image? Salt. Although today I am always checking the sodium content thing because we know that salt is bad. But remember, right, in the Middle Ages, that it was as precious as gold. In the ancient world, it was as precious as gold. And so if you had a little salt and you let it sit out on the table, it would lose the ability to flavor what you wanted to flavor, whether that was to preserve the meat or whatever it was. So that here in this instance, more is good. Well, our ears go, oh no, more salt is not good. It's bad. So that's an image that we're going to have to struggle with to figure out how we convert that or change that. But the idea is that the closer you are to the source, the stronger it is, and the further away you are, the less able that source is to do what it's supposed to do. So here's the image again, right? Let your light shine. If you do these things, your light will shine. What is it that we want to shine? What is it that we want others to see? What is it that we want others to taste or to know about the flavor of their life? Well, for Isaiah, of course, it's going to be the Torah. Love God with your heart, your soul, your mind, your strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Exodus, this is who God is. Slow to anger, rich in mercy, abounding in kindness, steadfast in love. I've just given you light and salt. Meaning the light is every time that you practice slow to anger, rich in mercy, abounding in kindness, steadfast in love, you are bringing a little bit more of light. If you're atheist, God, if you're a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim, you're bringing more of what has the ability and the power to transform and change the world. You're bringing more of that into the world. Meaning every time, and the contrast is, of course, that every time we act with hatred and anger and that we pick up a gun to shoot somebody because we can't figure out another way to resolve our conflict, the other time we curse and scream at people, every time that we do something contrary to that which is light and salt, we are like oxygen, taking oxygen right out of the room and letting the light go out. And we're throwing salt out on the streets, which we don't do here in Arizona in the wintertime, like the people in the north and northeast have to do. We're taking it out. Every time that we act contrary to ourselves, because we're spiritual people, every time that we act contrary to the presence of the divine that is in us, we're sucking the oxygen right out of the world and right out of our brothers and sisters. And without oxygen, we die. That's what Isaiah is saying. You're going to die if you keep sucking the oxygen by your shouting and rituals and chanting incense. You're sucking the oxygen right out of the world. Put some back in by doing these things that you know to be right. Feeding, clothing, visiting, healing, making whole, lifting up, setting free. That's where the light is. That's where the oxygen is. And we all know that that's the only way that light and salt. That's what being righteous means. That's what it means to be in the reign of God.